The word minimal, I think, can be interpreted in so many ways, and that was really what I was interested in with the exhibition here. Of course, there is a core group of artists that we might identify with a capital M minimalism, you could say. Those artists are a smaller group, I would say, associated with the northeast of America. But I've been interested in really thinking about an expanded understanding of minimal B, inclusive of different regions, different geographies, and even slightly different generations as well. It was actually a great discovery to realize that there were so many artists of a minimal persuasion in the collection of Francois Pinault. I was perhaps more familiar with the figurative work, the more contemporary work. And so really my starting point for the exhibition was to delve deep into the work that was present and to think about how we could tell this more expanded narrative around minimal art. I was thrilled to see that there were extraordinary holdings of work by the Monoha group, the Japanese group associated with a minimal language in Japan in the 1960s and 70s. But indeed, there were many other works from different regions, both from Europe and the US, where we could begin to tell a story about this really global conversation at that time. It seemed very important not to flatten the artists who were present. Of course, what happened in Rio de Janeiro or in Tokyo, in London, in Paris, in New York or Los Angeles were very different movements. The artists emerged from very different political conditions, from different material conditions. And so I didn't want to come up with thematics that I felt would somehow reduce the specificity of their work. It became really quite natural to think about how to bring the artists together, whether it was a re-evaluation of the grid, of course a theme in art history for decades, if not centuries, but one which was really critically evaluated, I'd say, by these artists in the 60s and 70s, whether they were in Europe, US, or Latin America. And similarly, thinking about, for instance, Surface, which is really a section of the exhibition looking at the confusion, you could say, between painting and sculpture. Sculpture that is painted as if it were a painterly form, and painting that is presented almost as a sculpture on the wall. The rotunda, of course, at the Bourse, I think, is the most important moment of entry into the museum. The statement that is set there is really, I think, the mood for the whole journey through the Bourse. And so it was very important to me to have an artist who both was emblematic of this global movement, of this minimal moment in art history, but who also offered something new and perhaps would be a bit of a surprise for other people. Meg Webster is an artist that we've worked with extensively at Deer, at the museum that I run, and I find her work so particularly compelling because she's using these geometric forms, these reduced forms, but making the work entirely out of natural materials. So instead of the steel, concrete, the type of materials that perhaps we've traditionally associated with minimal art, Meg Webster's work is made from earth, from soil, from plants, flowers, berries, and really questions our understanding of the materiality of this minimal work. Within the Pinault collection, of course, there is incredible depth of certain artists. Robert Ryman, Agnes Martin, Onkawara are clearly great loves of Monsieur Pinault, and it was such a pleasure to think about how we could bring together groups of these works and really explore their language, their methodology in greater depth. Charlotte Posenenske, an artist again we've worked with extensively at Deer, a fascinating figure, a German minimal artist. Her work appears throughout the building, sort of intersecting with the architecture, perhaps surprising people in different spots around the building, perhaps even completely unnoticed, as her work is deliberately echoing the type of infrastructure that we're used to seeing in different types of modernized buildings, let's say. Her language, in this case, the series that we're showing, the DW series, are metal tubes of different configurations. The wonderful thing about Posenenske's work is that the curator, the collector, is at liberty to form them in whichever way they want. There are different structures that can be placed together, and we've integrated them into the architecture of the Bourse, of course itself such an extraordinary building, not only for its historic manifestation, but the Tadao Andao renovation. I was very aware, particularly from the work that we've been doing at DIA over the last years, that this period of time, the 60s and 70s and the sort of global minimal movement, was in fact something far more expansive than the story that had been told of course, incredible significant figures like Dan Flavin and Donald Judd who feature in the exhibition, but in fact there are other voices who were showing alongside these artists. Of course, Meg Webster is one of them. In fact, Donald Judd was a great supporter of Meg Webster's work, gave her first exhibition. But we see other figures like Howardina Pindell, a fascinating painter from New York. Howardina Pindell was in fact working at the Museum of Modern Art. There she was, right in the center of the picture of the conversation of what was happening in the art world at this time in the 1960s and 70s in New York. But perhaps has not been given her place in this conversation about minimal work. Her work appears both in the grid section and the monochrome section as she explores this a kind of non-traditional painterly practice, introducing different types of matter and material into her paint surfaces. Another artist, perhaps lesser known, is Rashid Areen, an artist who was Pakistani born but really spent much of his career in London, a very important minimal voice in London from the mid-1960s, whose work again also expresses something a little unusual. There's a wonderful piece which is intended to be interacted with, that's part of the exhibition, From Zero to Infinity, which really sort of questions the idea of the complete artwork, the finished artwork. This is a work in progress, in process. It's something that we can interact with and change ourselves. The Monohar movement was particularly important in this exhibition, partly because Monsieur Pinault has such an extensive collection of these artists, Kishio Suga, Koshimuzu. The extent of the representation of these artists is really impressive, and it felt very important to me to give them a specific dedicated space. I was aware that perhaps these artists may be less familiar, particularly to an audience here in France. There hasn't been an extensive exhibition of their work, but they are not only in dialogue through materials, approach, and aesthetics, but in fact, there's a very important history of these artists showing here in Paris as well. The 1971 Paris Biennale was a moment where many of these artists, in fact, came, exhibited here, and became either friends or associates of artists both in Europe and the US. So there's a real history, a real dialogue between these generations of artists. Of course, the building is the starting point for any exhibition here. It's not only round, but it also has very particular historic features. I was very interested in opening the windows. There are, of course, interior windows and exterior windows on the second floor of the Bourse. And in my sort of conception of the exhibition and the way in which the work would be encountered, having natural light, having this opacity, this relationship to the city was very important, in particular in relation to the way in which the works create this kind of choreography. I think fundamentally, some of the key concerns are still as relevant today as they were then. One in particular, I would say, is about a focused viewership. Many of these artists are really calling for us to slow down, to spend time, to observe some more subtle, perhaps even at times minute details. The work of Robert Ryman, for example, which really demands of us a careful viewing. Of course, I would love for visitors to take away this very direct dialogue with us, with our bodies, with our sensibilities. In the case of Meg Webster, of course, there's a deeply sensorial experience to be had. But in other works, I think it's really very much about a confrontation, perhaps, with the work. If we encounter something like Liu Fan's sculptural work, a rock placed on top of a sheet of glass, we're very much aware of the action that took place. It's really a call to our sensibility, to our understanding of the weight, the effect of gravity, the fragility of the glass. So there's something extremely empathetic, perhaps, that the artists are calling on, that we really understand and experience their work. The earth and on the canvases behind me by Michelle Stewart rubbed into the surface. We're very aware of the materiality of matter that we're of course familiar with in our day-to-day life.